For decades, Meg Ryan occupied a rare space in popular culture. She was visible without being distant, familiar without being ordinary. Her presence on screen wasn't defined by spectacle, but by recognition. Audiences didn't need to be introduced to her characters. They felt as if they already knew them. This sense of familiarity became one of the defining elements of her career, and over time, it shaped how she herself was perceived. During the height of her success, Meg Ryan's public image aligned closely with the roles she portrayed. Romantic comedies of the late 20th century relied heavily on emotional accessibility, warmth, and relatability, and she embodied those qualities with ease. Her performances didn't demand attention through intensity or controversy. Instead, they invited audiences into stories that felt personal, almost intimate. This alignment between persona and performance created a powerful effect. Viewers didn't simply watch her films, they projected meaning onto her presence. Over time, the distinction between character and individual became increasingly blurred. What began as admiration gradually evolved into expectation. In Hollywood, expectation is rarely neutral. As her career progressed, the media environment surrounding film and celebrity culture began to shift. Coverage became more immediate, analysis shortened, narratives hardened quickly. Where once interviews unfolded over time, now moments were isolated, repeated, and reinterpreted endlessly. The space for complexity narrowed. In this environment, maintaining a consistent public image required constant participation. Silence became noticeable. Absence invited interpretation. Meg Ryan did not respond by increasing her visibility. She did the opposite. Her appearances became selective, her interviews rare. She did not publicly narrate every career decision or personal transition. At the time, this withdrawal wasn't framed as strategy. It was framed as mystery. But mystery is rarely allowed to exist on its own. When information is missing, assumptions rush in to fill the gap. Over the years, a parallel narrative developed. One constructed not from her words, but from repetition. Headlines referenced earlier moments. Commentary echoed commentary. Context thinned. The idea of Meg Ryan as a public figure became increasingly detached from her actual participation in the conversation. What's often overlooked is that withdrawal does not erase influence. Even without new appearances, her name continued to circulate. Her films remained part of cultural memory. Her image was preserved in a specific era, frozen in time. This freezing is significant. When a public figure steps away, they are often remembered not as they are, but as they were. Growth becomes invisible. Change is interpreted as absence rather than evolution. And so, without intention or announcement, Meg Ryan's silence became part of her story. At the same time, the broader conversation around fame was changing. Audiences began questioning the sustainability of constant exposure. Public discussions about privacy, agency, and long-term careers gained traction. The assumption that visibility was a permanent requirement started to weaken. Yet for Meg Ryan, the narrative remained largely unchanged, until it didn't. Years later, when she finally chose to address the public narrative, the moment landed differently than it would have before. The industry had shifted, the audience had matured, and the context had expanded. Her decision to speak was not reactive. It did not arrive in response to a single headline or controversy. It emerged after distance had already done its work. This distance reframed the meaning of her words before they were even heard. Rather than entering an active dispute, her statement entered a reflective space. It wasn't competing with noise. It was punctuating silence. And that distinction matters. Because when a public figure speaks after a prolonged absence, the act itself becomes meaningful. It signals intention. It suggests that the words are not obligatory, but chosen. This is where the story begins to shift. Not toward revelation, but toward understanding. Meg Ryan did not attempt to redefine her career. She contextualized it. She did not confront public perception head-on. She reframed her relationship with it. And in doing so, she introduced a perspective that had been missing. Not because it was hidden, but because it had been withheld. This first part of the story is not about what was said. It's about the environment in which it was finally heard. As the years passed, Meg Ryan's silence began to function almost like a mirror. The less she said, the more people projected onto her absence. In a media environment built around immediacy, reflection was often replaced by repetition. The same images, the same quotes, the same interpretations resurfaced again and again, slowly solidifying into something that resembled a fixed narrative. This process rarely requires intent. It doesn't depend on hostility or admiration. It simply follows momentum. When a public figure no longer contributes new information, existing material becomes the foundation for ongoing interpretation. Over time, that interpretation can feel definitive, even when it isn't. What's significant about Meg Ryan's case is how closely her public image remained tied to a specific era. Her most recognizable roles belong to a time when celebrity culture emphasized approachability. Audiences were encouraged to feel close to performers, to imagine continuity between on-screen characters and real lives. That closeness created a sense of ownership, an unspoken belief that access was permanent. When that access ended, it disrupted the relationship. Instead of being understood as a recalibration, her withdrawal was often framed as disappearance. Questions replaced context. Speculation replaced explanation. And in the absence of new information, the past became the present. But while the public narrative remained static, the world around it continued to change. The entertainment industry underwent a fundamental shift. Careers lengthened. The definition of relevance evolved. Actors increasingly stepped in and out of visibility, choosing projects selectively or redefining success on their own terms. The idea that longevity required constant exposure began to lose its authority. At the same time, audiences matured. Viewers who once consumed celebrity stories passively became more critical of the mechanisms behind them. Conversations about media pressure, identity, and personal agency became more common. Silence, once interpreted as avoidance, began to be reconsidered as self-preservation. It is within this evolving landscape that Meg Ryan's decision to speak gains its full meaning. By the time she addressed the public narrative, the cultural conditions had changed enough to allow for a different kind of reception. Her words were not competing with a breaking news cycle. They were entering a space shaped by reflection rather than urgency. Rather than correcting individual misconceptions, her perspective addressed something broader: the relationship between identity and exposure. She acknowledged the existence of public perception without attempting to control it. This approach reframed her silence not as absence, but as boundary setting. Boundaries are rarely visible from the outside. They are often mistaken for withdrawal or disengagement. But in reality, they are acts of intention. Publicly available statements suggest that Meg Ryan viewed her career as one part of her life, not its defining feature. This distinction becomes increasingly important in an industry that often collapses professional output and personal identity into a single narrative. Maintaining that separation requires restraint, especially when the public expects continuity. Her silence, then, can be understood not as disengagement, but as refusal to perform identity on demand. This refusal becomes more significant when viewed over time. It challenges the assumption that relevance must be continuously asserted. It suggests that stepping back does not diminish legacy. It can clarify it. As her voice re-entered the conversation, it did so without urgency. There was no attempt to reclaim a position or respond to every interpretation. Instead, her words functioned as a frame, allowing the existing narrative to be seen differently. This reframing does not eliminate ambiguity. It doesn't resolve every question, but it shifts responsibility back to the audience, inviting viewers to reconsider how stories are formed and sustained. The longer a narrative exists without direct input, the more resistant it becomes to change. By waiting, Meg Ryan allowed distance to soften that resistance. Her perspective didn't collide with established interpretations. It gently disrupted them. This is a rare approach in celebrity culture, where timing is often dictated by external pressure. Choosing when to speak, rather than reacting to when one is expected to, represents a form of agency that is often overlooked. And this agency is central to understanding the significance of the moment. Her statement did not seek validation. It offered context. It did not demand reconsideration. It made it possible. The conversation that followed was quieter than the speculation that preceded it, and that contrast is telling. Loud narratives thrive on immediacy. Reflective ones unfold slowly. Meg Ryan's return to the public conversation did not reignite attention. It redirected it. In the end, the story of Meg Ryan's public statement is not about revelation. It is about timing, distance, and the long arc of public life. It illustrates how narratives form not only through what is said, but through when it is said and when it isn't. By choosing to speak after years of relative silence, she altered the dynamic between herself and the audience. She did not position herself as an object of interpretation, but as a participant in a conversation that had long continued without her. This shift matters because it reasserts the idea that public figures retain agency over their engagement with public perception. Legacy is often misunderstood as something fixed. In reality, it is fluid. It changes as cultural values change. It evolves as context expands. And it is constantly renegotiated through interpretation. Meg Ryan's legacy, once defined almost exclusively by a specific genre and era, now exists within a broader framework. Her work remains central, but it is no longer the sole point of reference. The choices she made, including the choice to step back, have become part of the story. This expanded understanding challenges the expectation that public figures must remain accessible to remain relevant. It suggests that relevance can persist even in absence, and that meaning can deepen over time rather than fade. Her statement did not close the conversation. It slowed it down. In doing so, it encouraged a different kind of engagement, one that values reflection over reaction and context over immediacy. This approach aligns with a growing recognition that celebrity narratives are often incomplete, shaped more by repetition than by intention. By reintroducing her voice at a moment of her choosing, Meg Ryan demonstrated that silence does not negate presence. It reframes it. This reframing has implications beyond her individual story. It speaks to a broader cultural shift in how audiences relate to fame, identity, and longevity. As the mechanisms of celebrity culture continue to evolve, stories like hers offer alternative models, ones that prioritize autonomy over exposure. The timing of her words matters because it reflects an understanding of narrative not as something to be controlled, but as something to be contextualized. She did not attempt to overwrite existing interpretations. She added depth to them, and that depth changes how the story is remembered. In a culture that often rewards immediacy, patience becomes a statement. Choosing when to speak becomes part of the message, and allowing silence to exist, not as absence, but as intention, challenges the very structure of public discourse. Meg Ryan's decision to speak, then, is significant, not because of what it revealed, but because of what it represented. It marked a transition from being interpreted to participating, from being framed to framing. This is why the moment resonates. Not as a turning point, but as a clarification. Not as a confrontation, but as context. And not as an ending, but as an expansion of a story that continues to unfold, shaped not only by visibility, but by choice.